Hello everybody and welcome to today's webinar all about salary sacrifice pensions in Sage 50 Payroll. This is one of the webinars included in our Pensions Discovery webinar series for which you can earn your very own digital badge, and we will tell you more about that badge at the end of today's session. My name's Duncan, I'm your host and presenter, and I am joined today by my colleagues Alice and Ollie, who are both standing by in the background, ready and waiting to answer any questions. Let's now take a look at what we'll cover in today's webinar. So we'll start with an introduction to salary sacrifice pensions and how this differs from a non-salary sacrifice or traditional pension scheme. We're then going to take a look at the setup in Sage 50 Payroll, looking at the key scheme settings for salary sacrifice schemes and how to assign the scheme to your employees, either for the first time or replacing a non-salary sacrifice scheme. We'll then take a look at the payroll process, showing you where to check and amend the pension contributions for these types of scheme. And then we'll move on to talk about the national insurance savings option that can automatically calculate employer NI savings and add that into the pension contribution. At the end of the webinar, we'll take a look through the further support. I'll tell you more about the digital badge, and we'll have a chance for you to ask any final questions in the Q&A. So let's get straight on to our introduction to salary sacrifice pension schemes. Now, with a salary sacrifice scheme, the amount taken from the employee is taken from their gross pay before calculation of tax and national insurance. So it's not a pension contribution as such, it's a salary sacrifice arrangement that an employer makes with the employee. And the end result is that the amount sacrificed is then combined with the employer's own contribution and paid into the pension pot. Now, one of the main reasons that employers and employees choose to use salary sacrifice arrangements is that both parties would benefit by paying less national insurance, as the salary sacrifice is taken before calculation of tax and national insurance. Now, as an employer, this gives you some additional income or some NI savings, which means that you could choose to pay more into your employees' pension pots, perhaps paying that saving itself into the scheme. And we'll show you a feature that helps calculate that a little bit later on. It obviously increases your employees' take-home pay compared to a non-salary sacrifice scheme, as they've not had to pay national insurance on the amount that they've sacrificed. Employers could use it to offer improved benefits packages to their employees, or you might simply reinvest your savings back into your business. So there are plenty of compelling reasons to look at salary sacrifice arrangements, but also some important details on how they work and some of the restrictions. So what I have done on this slide is we've linked to an article on the HMRC website, which gives some key information about salary sacrifice arrangements in general. A couple of things I would like to call out, things to consider when using a salary sacrifice scheme, is the implication on a national minimum wage. So if you do have a salary sacrifice arrangement, you must ensure that the salary sacrifice doesn't take your employees' gross pay below their national minimum wage. Now, if you pay your employees a fixed salary, you would need to sort of factor in the salary sacrifice amount and manually work out that you are paying them above minimum wage. If you pay hourly and you use the minimum wage check in Sage 50 Payroll, there is a limitation to that feature in that it can't factor in the salary sacrifice into the calculation. But it will always warn you that the employee has a salary sacrifice pension and that you would need to manually check that they're not being taken below the national minimum wage. So it's just a reminder to do that sort of due diligence for those employees. The other thing just to call out at the onset is that salary sacrifice pension schemes cannot deduct a salary sacrifice from statutory payments. So statutory payments can still be used to calculate the employer contribution into the pension scheme, but you cannot take a salary sacrifice from statutory pay. So if you have employees on maternity or adoption leave, for example, and they're only receiving statutory pay, there would be no salary sacrifice deducted from them. So in these scenarios, we would always recommend you check the rules of your pension scheme to find out what should happen when employees are on statutory parental leave and their pay is reduced, as in many cases, the employer will need to maintain contributions into the pension scheme at the level they were before the maternity, adoption, or paternity leave began. So something just to keep in mind, and we'll show you how you can make manual adjustments to the pension contributions a little bit later on in the demo. So now that we've talked briefly about what a salary sacrifice pension scheme is, I'd like to go into more detail in how it all works in Sage 50 Payroll. Now, setting up the scheme is largely similar to setting up a non-salary sacrifice scheme, but we will focus on some of the main differences. But let's just start with a reminder of information you'll need to know before you can set up or amend any settings for your pension scheme. So first of all, you do need to check if it's a qualifying scheme that can be used for automatic enrolment. And if so, you can indicate that within the scheme settings. You'll need to know whether it uses qualifying earnings for pensionable pay, or if there are only specific pay elements that are pensionable. Now, qualifying earnings is a reference to most payments that are subject to tax and national insurance, but contributions are restricted between lower and upper thresholds. So again, your pension provider can confirm whether your scheme uses qualifying earnings or not. You'll need to know what the contribution levels are. So would these be fixed amounts or more commonly percentages to calculate? Make a note of any references you're given by your provider. So it might be known as a provider reference, employer account number, or similar terminology. And as long as you have all of these key details, you'll have enough information to ensure that your scheme has been set up correctly. Now, we're going to have a look at the scheme settings for a salary sacrifice scheme in the demo, but as a reminder on how to get there, from a company tasks, you'll find the pension schemes option. You'll then be able to create as many schemes as required. So you might have a mixture of salary sacrifice and other pension schemes. And then within the scheme settings, we're going to point out where you can turn this into a salary sacrifice scheme. So let's get straight into that now. I'm just going to bring the slides down. And to access my pension scheme settings, I'm going to start from the company tasks here on the left-hand side. And then from the list of tasks, I can select pension schemes, which takes me into my pension schemes list. Now, the one we're going to focus on is this one that I've named SalSac Pension. And if I click onto Edit, so I can edit the settings, first of all, it does tell me that it's in use by at least one employee. So I know that I've already assigned it to employees. And then here on the Details tab, we'll see the main pension details. So description you can enter yourself. I find it useful, so I can immediately identify that this is my salary sacrifice pension. And then in the type drop-down, there are a selection of types of pension schemes, some of which don't actually exist these days, as contracted out has now been abolished. But if your type of scheme is listed here, you would select it. If not, you would select other, as I have just here. Now, the first checkbox to draw your attention to is the qualifying scheme box. So you would need to tick this box, particularly if you're using the pensions module, to confirm that this scheme can be used for automatic enrolment. And then the setting just underneath is the one to use qualifying earnings for pensionable pay. Now, in this example, I'm not using qualifying earnings for pensionable pay. It is only the salary that will be used for salary sacrifice and employer pension calculations. But if it was a scheme that used qualifying earnings, you would select this box, and that way it would apply the lower and upper threshold to the pensionable pay when calculating those earnings. And we'll take a look at the pay element settings in respect of that in a few moments' time. Now, the key setting for a salary sacrifice scheme is this checkbox. So if you've ticked salary sacrifice scheme, that will apply that setting to that particular scheme. And the box underneath is to automatically calculate and add employer NI savings to the pension contribution. So this has been a much requested feature. It came in version 31, and we will talk more about that feature towards the end of the webinar. So the key thing here is that we've ticked salary sacrifice scheme, and we've selected whether or not to use qualifying earnings for pensionable pay. Now, selecting the Employee tab is where you enter the default employee contribution. But with a salary sacrifice scheme, it isn't technically a contribution. It's the salary sacrifice amount, which will then ultimately become an employer contribution when combined with the employer's own amount. So we have set this one up as a percentage. It's set up as a 5% salary sacrifice, and that will be based on any payment that I flagged to include in salary sacrifice calculations. So we're going to ensure that it's just our salary that we've set up that way. You'll see that the settings to include statutory payments are not available to select, and the reason for that is that salary sacrifice can't be deducted from statutory pay. And where you would usually traditionally see the tax relief setting, you might see here that it says reduce gross salary, as that is how a salary sacrifice works. So that's the main difference when it comes to the employee side of things. Clicking onto the Employer tab, we can see the employer's own contribution. So this isn't the total contribution, including the salary sacrifice. This is just what the employer is putting in themselves. So again, we've selected 3% of the pensionable pay. And for employer contributions, we can include statutory payments in the calculation. And I have, in this example, selected the statutory payments boxes. And then the provider tab is just where you can make a note of your provider details. So if you do have a provider's reference, you would pop that in this box just here. So this is my salary sacrifice pension scheme. If I click OK, that would save any changes that I've made to the settings. I'm going to close out of the pension schemes for now, as I do want to show you in a bit more detail the pay element settings that specifically apply to salary sacrifice pensions. Now, to access the pay element settings, I can click Pay Elements from my company tasks. In this example, I have 5 payments set up, and to view the settings of each payment, I can select it and click Edit. Now, the boxes in the middle are to indicate if a payment is qualifying earnings. So qualifying earnings are used for pension assessments and also for pension contributions where the pension scheme uses qualifying earnings for pensionable pay. And then the pension main and AVC settings indicate which payments are used, in this case, for the employer pension contribution. Now, this salary sacrifice pension only setting is what you would select for any payment that needs to be included in salary sacrifice calculations. So I've got it selected for my basic pay here. But if we check the settings of my next payment, my bonus payment, you'll see for this one, we have not selected salary sacrifice. Now, it does still count towards qualifying earnings. And if you do have a salary sacrifice scheme that uses qualifying earnings for pensionable pay, you would also need to tick the salary sacrifice box for any payment that is qualifying earnings. Because salary sacrifices will be calculated from payments that have the salary sacrifice box ticked. And if it's a scheme that uses qualifying earnings, it will automatically apply the lower and upper threshold. But in my example, as basic is my only pensionable or salary sacrificeable payment, I haven't got it selected for bonus. So you could work your way through reviewing all of your pay element settings one by one. But just to share a couple of tips with you to speed up this process and to help you change the pay element settings in bulk if needed. You can review all of your pay element settings by running the payment types report. So if you just select the reports option found here above the employee list, I've added it to my favorites, payment types, but it's located in the company folder. And then when you scroll down, you should find payment types within this list. And if I just run this report to preview, you'll see that this gives me a handy way of checking the pay element settings for all of my payments in one place. So you can see, for example, that only basic pay is set up as pensionable and included in AVC calculations. All of my taxable payments are set up as qualifying earnings. The only exception is expenses, so a non-taxable payment when I reimburse expenses. And then the salary sacrifice setting in this example is only applying to the basic pay because my pension scheme isn't using qualifying earnings for pensionable pay. Now, once I've reviewed these settings, if I realize there are quite a few that I need to change, another quick tip to share with you is that you can change the pay element settings using global changes for more than one payment at the same time. So just to show you where you can do that, this might come in useful. If you go to the Tasks menu at the top of the screen and come down to Global Changes, you can go to the Pay Elements section and select Payments. And what you'll then see is a list of all of your payments. And then you've got the settings underneath, which can either be retained as they currently are, or can be set or cleared by using the Set or Clear option. So if, for example, I needed to make my bonus overtime and commission payments subject to salary sacrifice, I would be able to do that globally by setting the flag like so, and then clicking OK. Now, I'm not going to make any changes because my pay elements are set up correctly for my type of pension scheme, but I just wanted to highlight that as an option when it comes to globally setting your pay element settings. So that is my pension scheme setup. Let's just recap some of the key details there for you. So to get into the pension scheme settings, you go to Company, Pension Schemes, select your scheme and click Edit. And then the key setting on the Details tab there was the Salary Sacrifice Scheme checkbox. The other thing we took a look at was the pay element settings, which you can review from Company and Pay Elements. So salary sacrifice needs to be selected for anything included in the employee's salary sacrifice calculation. And then the pension main and AVC box is what is used to calculate the employer contribution. And as a reminder, qualifying earnings includes basically any payment subject to tax and national insurance, so salary, wages, commission, bonuses, and overtime, as well as the statutory payments. So now that we've got the scheme set up, we do need to ensure that it is assigned to the relevant employees. And the way you assign a pension scheme will depend on whether or not you are using the pensions module and whether it's a brand new employee or employees that are perhaps switching from one scheme to another. Now, first of all, if you use the pensions module and you need to automatically enroll someone into a pension scheme, you should always do this via the pension assessment option. So you wouldn't need to assign a scheme manually for an employee being auto-enrolled. It is done when you run a pension assessment, and it will pick out the default scheme from your pensions module settings. But if you don't have the pensions module, or if you have another reason to manually assign a scheme, this can be done within the employee record by going to the Pensions tab and selecting Manage Schemes. You can even assign pension schemes using global changes. So if you have switched a number of employees from one type of pension scheme to another, once you've set up that new scheme, there is a quicker way of assigning that to the employees. So let's take a look now at where you would go to do that. So first of all, I'm going to select an employee that already has the scheme assigned. So when I go into the employee record, I can go to the Pensions tab here at the top of the screen. I can already see the primary screen is showing as SALSAC pension, but if I click Manage Schemes, you'll see that this has been added here. So I'd have clicked the Add button and I've selected the scheme that I want to apply. And if you need to review any of the pension contributions, you can click on Edit, and you'll see here the pension details, the date that they joined that scheme, the employee sacrifice amount, which is a 5% salary sacrifice in this case, and the employee contribution, which is showing as 3%. And the pension information tab just gives you a bit of a recap of the pension scheme settings. So if I had an employee and I needed to switch onto a salary sacrifice scheme, what I could do is go to the pensions area in their record, manage the schemes, edit the scheme they're already assigned to, and enter a left scheme date. So that could be the day before they officially join the new scheme. And once that left scheme date has been entered, I can then add on the salary sacrifice pension like so, set the join scheme date, review the contributions, and then click OK to assign that scheme. So that's one example of when you might need to do this manually, even if you have the pensions module. Finally, for that global changes option, so let's say I've got 3 employees that I want to move on to a salary sacrifice scheme. I can select them first and go into tasks, global changes, and pensions. And we can set the option to leave the existing pension scheme. So I'm going to set the date left as the last pay date for those employees. And then to assign the new scheme, quick tip here, set your process date to the date they joined that scheme. I'm just going to set mine to the 6th of June, day after they were last paid. And I could go into tasks, global changes, pensions, and add a pension scheme. And we can choose the one that we want to add and tick the box to make it their primary scheme. So that is a way that we can globally assign the pension scheme if required. So we've got everything set up. We've got it assigned to the employees who are in that pension scheme. And just as a reminder there, when it comes to assigning the scheme, you would select the scheme reference from the drop-down, enter the join scheme date, and make a note of the active membership date. So the date you sent the details to the pension provider. And then if necessary, you can individually amend contribution levels for an employee, both the employee sacrifice and the employer contribution. So you can read more about all of that following the link on the slide. So next up, we're going to take a look at how to check and where required amend contributions for employees in a salary sacrifice scheme. And this does work slightly differently to a non-salary sacrifice scheme. So we'll give you the demo first before we come back and recap. So let's just rejoin our demo. I'm going to be processing my monthly paid employees. So I've already set my monthly process date. I'm just going to select the employee who's already in the salary sacrifice scheme. And then we'll go ahead and open the Enter Payments window. So currently the employee is being paid their usual basic salary. But if we check the Summary tab and look for an employee pension contribution, you will see, because it's a salary sacrifice scheme, that there is no employee contribution showing here. Now, the reason for that, if I just click back to the Payments tab, is that they have a salary sacrifice. And if you look towards this section, next to the tax code, we can see a salary sacrifice amount has been calculated, £137.50, and that is 5% of the employee's salary. That in turn has reduced the employee's gross pay. So they're only paying tax and national insurance on this lower amount. We can see the tax and the national insurance deducted and the employee's net pay. Now, to find the actual pension contribution, you would need to select the Employers button. So with a salary sacrifice pension, it is 100%. It's an employer contribution, employer-only contribution, which consists of the amount the employer is contributing plus the salary sacrifice amount. So in this case, it's £220, and that consists of the £137.50 sacrificed by the employee plus the employer's 3%, gives us the total of 220. And if I just bring up a calculator, if we take the salary amount and take 8% of that, that is our £220, and that is what is going to go into the pension pot. So it's not shown as an employee contribution. Instead, it shows as a salary sacrifice amount. And just to highlight the impact that that would have on an employee's net pay, if I select another employee who earns the exact same salary, but who is in a non-salary sacrifice pension scheme, you can see that they have a pension contribution, still 137.50, but that only benefits from tax relief. So they still pay national insurance on all of their salary. So the net pay, 216,354 for this particular employee. The national insurance was 136.16. And if we compare that with the employee on salary sacrifice, their net pay is slightly higher because their national insurance is lower. So that's probably the key benefit of having a salary sacrifice scheme. Now, we did mention that sometimes you may need to manually amend the pension contribution amounts, and this particularly comes into play when there are periods of statutory maternity, adoption, or paternity leave. Now, you should always check your scheme rules with the pension provider, just so that you're absolutely clear on what you need to do during these periods of leave. But the general principle is that the employer contribution needs to be kept at the same level it was before the employee went on this leave. Now, I've actually got an employee who has started maternity leave, and she is on the salary sacrifice pension scheme. And if I just go into the enter payment screen for them, they're only receiving SMP. So we're not making up to basic, so we've got no payments entered, apart from the statutory maternity pay. Now, the employer contribution is still being calculated, but this is simply 3% of this slightly reduced statutory pay, and that will dramatically reduce once they've had these 6 weeks at the higher rate of SMP. Now, I've spoken to the pension provider in this example, and they have informed me that I need to maintain an employer contribution of £200 throughout this maternity leave while they're on paid maternity leave. So in order to manually enter the pension contributions, I would jump into the employee record. This message is telling me that currently the pension contribution is below the minimum. I would go to the pensions tab and click manage schemes. I can then edit the pension scheme. And in this example, I am going to set the employer contribution to a fixed amount of £200. Now, the employee salary sacrifice is still set at 5%, but as they will not be receiving any wages for the duration of their maternity leave, there will not be any employee salary sacrifice. So again, the exact action you need to take will depend on the scheme rules. You can see previously there's been a combined contribution, sacrifice plus employer of 200. My pension provider has said I need to maintain that, so that's what I'm going to do. And you can see that the employer contribution is now showing the full £200. There is no employee salary sacrifice because there are no payments that it can be sacrificed from. So just wanted to show you there where you can enter those details. So a quick recap on that section before we look at the NI savings. So checking the contributions compared to a non-salary sacrifice scheme, it is slightly different. So you won't see a pension contribution on the summary tab for the employee. Instead, you'll see a salary sacrifice amount towards the bottom of the enter payment screen. The employer contribution is the combined employer amount plus salary sacrifice amount. So that is going to be calculated for us, or if required, can be set to a fixed amount. So you just saw there, if you do need to amend any contribution levels, whether that's the employee salary sacrifice or the employer contribution, that's done by managing the pension scheme within the employee record, editing the scheme, and then editing the contributions as needed. And when we go back to the demo, I will also show you how that appears on the payslip. Now, last thing we're going to cover in the webinar today is around national insurance savings. So this is specifically the employer national insurance savings. And a common request that we had was a way of automatically calculating this saving and then including that in the employer pension contribution. So in version 31, which we released just over a year ago now, we have added that functionality. So Payroll can now automatically calculate and add employer NI savings to the pension contribution. But please be aware that it can only add the full employer NI saving that the salary sacrifice scheme creates. It can't add a partial amount of it. So if your arrangement is just to contribute some of the NI savings, you'll need to follow the current workaround, which is manually calculating and entering a fixed amount contribution. Now, where you are contributing the full employer NI saving, you can select a setting within the pension scheme, which will automatically calculate and add that in each period, with the exception of directors, because directors' national insurance is calculated in a cumulative calculation across the whole year's earnings. So if you do have a director where you're reinvesting the employer NI saving will only be added in that director's final payment of the tax year. And just to highlight where the setting is, we saw it earlier in the company pension schemes option on the details tab, you've got the checkbox to add employer NI savings. So let's finish with a quick demo of this. And as promised, we'll show you some of the reports and pay slips. So first of all, without the setting enabled, so in my pension scheme settings, at the moment, I do not have the employer NI savings selected. If I go into the enter payment screen, the employee we looked at before, it's taken their salary amount, let's calculate 5% salary sacrifice, and the employer contribution added on top is simply 3% of that amount. And that gave us a total of £220. Now, what that looks like on a pay slip is it will show a negative payment line for the salary sacrifice. So I meant to show you this earlier. Let's just zoom in slightly. So that's our salary sacrifice amount. And in terms of pension contributions, it is simply showing an employer contribution, which is £137.50 plus the employer's 3%, giving us a total of 220. Now let's switch on the setting to reinvest the employer NI. So going into my pension schemes, into the salary sacrifice pension, and now ticking the box to add the employer NI saving. We'll have a look at what difference that's made. So no change to the salary sacrifice amount. That's still 5% of the employee's salary. But looking at the employer contribution, you can see that's now increased from £220 to £240.63. So it's added on an extra £20.63. And to show you how that was calculated, if we take the salary sacrifice amount, which we know was £137.50, and then calculate 15% of that amount, which was the employer NI that would have been paid on that amount, that gives us our £20.63, which has been calculated and automatically added to the employer pension. So that's where it's getting it from. This is quite a simple example. So it's took the salary sacrifice amount. That is all well above the kind of lower earnings limit, secondary threshold, etc. So the NI saving is now automatically included. So that's just reflected in an increased pension contribution overall. So we do have a bit more of a detailed explanation on how they NI savings are calculated. So if you're interested to read more in that, do download the handout and follow the link on there. And that's actually brought us to the end of what we want to show you today about salary sacrifice pensions. As promised, we are going to work through some of the further support that's available and talk about the digital badge that you can earn as part of this pensions discovery series. And if you do have any questions of your own that you'd like to ask our team, do remember to pop that into the Q&A now, and we'll do our best to answer as many of those before we wrap up. So this was session 2 of our Pensions Discovery webinar series. If you are able to attend at least 5 different webinars live, plus one of our pensions quiz sessions, you would then qualify for a digital badge that'll be sent to you by email following the end of this series. So you'd expect to receive that at some point in July. So other sessions that are coming up, including pension calculations. So next session for that will be the 11th of June. We've then got some on the pensions module. So getting set up and started with the pensions module, a deeper dive into the pension assessment, handling pension re-enrollments every 3 years, and sending pension data. So if you can pick out at least 5 of those sessions and attend one of our quizzes, you would get the digital badge. Just make sure you do register for all webinars using the same email address. In terms of the further support, our help centre is your first port of call. If you need any assistance with your software, you can find this by clicking any help icon in Sage 50 Payroll or by visiting sage.co.uk/help. From there, you will find contact details for our support team, should you need to contact them. You can also search the knowledge base, read our support guides, check out the upcoming webinars, and you can chat with our AI assistant for quick answers to your payroll questions. Also wanted to spotlight our personalized training service. So you can now book Sage one-to-one remote training, providing an expert one-to-one support session tailored to you. Gives you greater confidence and accuracy, and these sessions are remote and convenient, delivered remotely at the comfort of your desk. You can see prices start from £250 as some of the feedback that we've received from these sessions. If you would like to inquire, simply scan the QR code now and complete our quick inquiry form, and someone will be in touch, or we'll include a link to the inquiry form in the follow-up email as well. So great service, particularly if you're new to our software or if you're looking to gain greater efficiencies. So for the remaining time of the webinar, we're going to stay online answering the questions in the Q&A. If you'd like a copy of the handouts, don't forget to download them before you leave us. I'm going to go on mute just to help out in the background with the questions. So we'll go quiet for a little while. I will come back when we are ready to close this webinar down. So I will speak to you shortly. Hello, everyone. Just popping back to say that we are now at the end of the allotted time. We will try to get out the final answers to the questions that have recently come in. So do stick with us in the Q&A. I would like to say thank you so much for joining us at the webinar today. And if you wouldn't mind completing the survey when you exit the webinar, we'd really appreciate knowing your feedback on today's session. We will also send you a follow-up email, which will include a link to the recording of today's session and a link to register for the other topics in this series. So it'd be great to get as many of you on those and earning your digital badge. With that said, though, on behalf of myself and the team here at Sage, thanks once again for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you on some of our other webinars in the near future. But it's goodbye for now.